All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to part 3 of 5 in our Data as a Feature webinar series. This is on visualizing data, how to develop reports and visualizations your users love. This is following part 2, obviously, where we covered the setup of the application and some of the foundational work that was required before we worked on a lot of the analytics, visualization, reporting piece, which we're going to be diving into more today. And if you aren't familiar with this project or you're coming in directly to part 3, the entire series is based around this demo application that we co-developed with TIBCO, co-developed with a partner called Project 202. And this demo app, if you haven't experienced it yet, is available on jaspersoft.com. There's a guided prompted tour that walks you through the application. It shows you the bits that are Jaspersoft, which is one of the products we're going to be speaking to today, and gives you a sense of how the application is built at a very high level. And the function of this webinar series is to take that guided prompted tour a level deeper and dig into the underpinnings a little bit more from a technical perspective. And obviously today we're going to be talking about the report and visualization development aspect of this demo app. And there is a relatively large team that worked on this project. You're going to be hearing from Sherman Wood, who's the Director of Solutions Consulting worldwide at TIBCO for the Jaspersoft product. And we're also going to be joined by Rachel Ross, who was the lead in this project in developing just about all of the reports and visualizations that you're going to see in the demo app. And she's going to walk you through one of those in particular as part of a demo in today's webinar. So those are the two people you're going to be hearing from. My name is Shane Switterick. You've probably heard my voice if you've been on some of the previous webinars, and I'm in product marketing at TIBCO, also specific to the Jaspersoft product group. So let's take a look at what we're going to be talking about today and peer into the agenda. So the first thing that we're going to do is actually not talk about the demo app specifically, but we're just going to talk about ways that you or options you have to visualize data. And we're going to, the second part of that, we are going to look at the demo app and give you a sense of where those visualizations reside within the demo app and the nature of them and how they're different from each other. And that's really going to set up part 2, which is going to get into the actual development of some of these reports and visualizations. And as I mentioned earlier, Rachel's going to be taking you through a product called Jaspersoft Studio that was used to design a lot of these highly formatted pixel perfect designs that you've seen in the demo app, or that you'll see when Sherman shows it to you here in just a bit. And with that, Rachel's also going to point out, she's worked on a number of these projects and she's been familiar with Jaspersoft for a good amount of time now. When you're working on large projects, it's important to have some best practices or just general practices to help you stay consistent, to help you be more efficient in the look and feel and the overall general elements of your visualizations and reports. And so she's going to share some of those learnings that she's had over the course of her experience with Jaspersoft. And then the final thing that we're going to show you, there's going to be a lot of obvious charts and graphs that you're going to see as part of the demo app. There's also going to be a map visualization that's actually not a Jaspersoft out-of-the-box chart or visualization that Jaspersoft is still powering behind the scenes. And so we're going to give you a purview into how you can do this using Jaspersoft to just inject data into a third-party visualization and make that possible as a part of your embedded application experience. So with that, I'm actually going to turn you over to the first part of the presentation, which is going to be Sherman walking you through part 1.
All right, thank you, Shane, for that. Let's dive into some of the ways you can visualize data with Jaspersoft. So Jaspersoft has been working in what we call embedded BI or embedded visualizations for many years now, and it is a different way of looking at it. You may have heard this pattern before in other parts of the series, but it's good to refresh the approach that we're talking about here. So when you're talking about embedded visualizations, so let's have a look at embedded BI at a high level, and then we'll be drilling into seeing some actual components that are working in a real application, which in this case is the bike share environment that we have built. So embedded BI or embedded visualizations is an area that Jaspersoft has been working on for many years. A lot of web applications embed Jaspersoft right into their environment, and the consistent thing that we see is the audience you're trying to solve for, trying to service, they're consumers. They just want the right information to the right person at the right time. That's what it's all about, and they need to have that as simple and as direct and as consistent as possible. So how do you do that? What does that actually mean? Well, and visualizations and dashboards in a web app is a big part of it, but it's also things like reports, say content you can take out of the application that you're working. People need that as a big part of their experience of the application. What we've also found is that a lot of the time people just want data to support the user experience, and we'll see some of that in action a bit later as well. But so you can create these visualizations reports in Jaspersoft and pull them into your app, but sometimes you just want the data as well coming out of that backend for different reasons. And the sort of ultimate level, which we're not going to go into today, is level of self-service. What can you give this consumer audience to make their life as simple as possible? You want it to be nice and flexible so that they can customize their experience in a simple way to get exactly what they need. So we have a process with implementing embedded visualizations and reporting with Jaspersoft. Obviously, deploy the platform anywhere you want. You need to connect to your data and set that up. And there's a variety of ways to do that with Jaspersoft, straight like SQL, but we have a metadata layer in there as well to abstract out the information to make it really there. It's mostly there for self-service. Create the visualizations that are now sitting in the Jaspersoft server, and then we embed. So what we'll be going to do today is really focus on that output section and driving back into the data tier a bit. And we're going to see obviously the embedding piece as the final result of that. So what I'm going to do now is we're going to dive into the bike share and highlight where some of these embedded visualizations are actually happening and how they're being built. Or Rachel's going to do how they're going to be built. So let's go and go directly into there. So this is the bike share app that we have built, and for those if you haven't heard it before, it's a simulated bike share management platform. So the idea being that there are people who are managing moving bikes around between the racks and so on in different regions. In this case, we're going to be focusing on regions of San Francisco. And there are really two roles going. There's a manager who's watching the operations, and then there's a driver who is actually physically moving the bikes around. And these people are collaborating. But what we're going to focus on today to highlight how this all gets done is the manager's viewpoint. So you come in and the manager's able to see the status of their franchise, the broken into regions with this map. And then we've got some KPI sort of visualizations down the bottom here, right? So in this case, to focus on what is actually happening, this map is actually getting data being generated by Jaspersoft in JSON to be included right inside the map. And I'll show you how so it's replacing what hand-coded microservices and that sort of thing that would normally be done in this particular case. And then down the bottom here, we've got sort of KPIs, and we can drill down on some of the details here. These are all nice and interactive. They are consistent with the look and feel of the whole environment. And so this is the actual section. So this is actually one air quotes report, and these are a variety of other ones down the bottom here, which are being rendered on the fly by the Jaspersoft platform and then included in that front end. Okay, So with that, I think we'll actually dive into how these were actually done.
All right, thank you, Sherman and Shane. Hi, everyone. As Shane mentioned, I'm Rachel Ross. I'm a solution architect for Project 202. We've been working with TIBCO and their clients by designing informative and actionable user experiences, as well as implementing those solutions utilizing the Jaspersoft platform for some time now. Today, I'm going to demonstrate how to create one of the chart-based reports that's included in the Bike Share demo app, and we're going to use Jaspersoft Studio. We're going to do some basic styling of that report, and then afterwards I'll show you a few productivity tips. So before I start, I'd like to take a few moments just to give a quick tour of Studio, just a real high level. Let's look at the default layout. When you install Jaspersoft Studio out of the box, you have this default layout in the top left. You'll see the repository and the Project Explorer panes. The Repository Explorer is where you create your connections to your data sources that you'll be querying for your report data while you're developing the report definitions. It also lists the connections to your Jaspersoft report server, where you'll eventually be publishing these report definitions to. The Project Explorer actually lists the physical files located on your local disks that you're working with, as well as any supporting files, such as images or scripts that are needed by those reports. And in the lower left, you have the outline pane. And what that shows is a visual format of the underlying XML of the report definition that you're currently working on. So right now I have this just generic report template up, and what you see is out of the box the elements that are usually brought in for that. In the upper right is the palette pane, and you have three different sections here, but basically what it contains are all of the built-in types of elements that can be added to a report out of the box. Then on the bottom here, we have the properties for whatever elements you have selected in either the outline pane or in the actual reports area. So finally, again, here's the report document pane, and that displays a visual representation of the currently opened and selected report. It also, you can toggle to see its underlying, what we call JRXML, but basically it's XML with a specific schema defined by Jasper reports. And then the ability to actually preview and run this report real time against the data source that you've defined for it. So that's a very basic intro into Jaspersoft Studio to help you get oriented before we start creating a new report. Now, since properties are really central when you're working with and creating your report definitions, you're going to be working in the properties pane a lot. So typically, I just like to keep mine front and center in here. Kind of maximize the real estate I have with that. We'll just drag that on over. So for our demo today, I'm going to take you through the process of recreating one of the chart-based reports from the Bike Share app. And I think Sherman just showed a quick little overview of one of those pages. But the specific report we're going to look at is this top stations in need charts. We're going to go ahead and create that from scratch. This is basically just your standard web page that imports various reports that were created in Studio And the top stations in need is simply one of those reports. Okay, so let's go ahead and close this. We're going to start by creating a new report definition file. I'm going to right click on the folder I want it in, new, and Jasper report. As you can see here, there are a lot of pre-formatted templates that are ready to use. For our purposes, we simply need a chart. No titles, no headers, no pre-formatting needed. So we're just going to stick with the blank A4. Next, and let's give it a name. I'm going to call this demo stations in need. And I'm going to hit finish. Now you could hit next and define your data sources, etc., but I'm not going to do that for the sake of this demo today. We'll do that in just a few minutes. Okay, so now what we have in the current context is the new JRXML file that I've created. And in the outline pane, you've got the basic structure of what's in that XML file here behind the scenes, which isn't much at all at this point. So back to design. Alrighty, so let's talk about these bands. What we see here are title, page header, column header, detail, etc. So for your traditional pixel perfect, ready to print report, you would generally want most, if not all, of these areas. But for this particular report, we don't. So I'm going to start by just highlighting these and getting rid of those. All right. What's left is the detail band and the summary band. Now, the detail band is a very special band for the reports in that every single row of data returned by your query will duplicate whatever is defined in this detail band. That's not what we want for a chart. We want a single chart that then will go ahead and display the data results that we hand it. So all we need for this report is the summary band. Now let's go ahead and delete the detail band. All right, simple. All right, let's highlight the actual node for the overall report itself. And let's create the size of the actual report or the canvas. So in the properties for the report, I'm going to edit the page format. I happen to know that this particular report is 592 pixels wide and 336 pixels high. And we have a 0 margin on all sides. We're going to simply create the chart, and we will let the web developer who's embedding this chart decide if there should be any kind of margins or styling around it. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and save along the way. It's a good habit to get into. Now I'm going to make the summary band actually take up the entire height of the canvas that we just defined, because right now it's not. So it looks very, slim here and thin. So I'm going to right click on the summary band, maximize the band height, and that looks about right. Yes, so the height is now 336. Save that. All right, so let's look over here at the actual chart and think about how this data pivots on what information. At the very top here, let's look at the filters we have. We have the ability to filter the data below by the overall franchise, or we can actually filter by subregions within that franchise. This particular chart is always the current time frame, so the time frame does not apply to it. Okay, so it's pretty simple: franchise ID and region ID. All right, so to create a parameter where values can be sent into this report and then a query is run based upon those parameters, we need to create one for franchise. I happen to know that the data type in the database for franchise ID is a string, so we'll keep that. And just for expediency's sake, let's put the default value as EA, which I happen to know is for San Francisco. Awesome. Save. And then let's repeat that for the region. Same thing, string. We'll leave that as no default value. Okay, great. So now we have franchise and region as parameters that can, basically these are values that can be sent in to this particular report, and we're going to include them in the query that we create, which then queries the database for the data needed. So let's go ahead and do that part next. Going to add a data source, and back over here in the repository, you can see that we already have a defined data adapter that points to the database that we need to query. So, okay, so let's open the data set and query dialog. We're going to choose previously defined data adapter. We're going to stay with SQL. There's a lot of different ways to query data depending upon the type of data source you have. And you can also, go through and look for your tables to help you form your query. For the sake of the demo, I'm just going to copy and paste the query that we need right into here. And as you can see here, I have something where system ID equals parameter franchise. So basically the value of the parameter named franchise will be inserted into this. Okay. I'm going to click read fields, and we should see our fields get listed. All right. So what about region? Basically what we need here is something like if the region ID was handed in, we need something like and region ID equals, and then the parameter value for region, right? But of course, we don't want it that way. There's a couple of different ways to do this. I'll show you one way that's basically a, it's called a conditional parameter. So let's take this out. And let's click on our parameters tab here. You can actually add a parameter right from this dialog. And we'll just call this a region expression. Okay. We don't need to prompt for it. This is going to be something that's calculated at runtime. It's a string, yes. And we're going to say that the default value for this, alrighty. There we go. So if a parameter value is handed in for the region parameter, in other words, if it's not null, if it's not empty, then we want this parameter value to basically say and region ID equals, and then that region parameter value. Okay. Awesome. So now we can just drag this up right here. And if an actual value for region ID is handed in, then that will go ahead and be evaluated and that string will be inserted. Since it is a string literal, we do need to add a little bit different syntax here. All right. So let's preview, see what kind of data we're getting back. Awesome. So we are getting some data. So now we have our connection to our data source. We have our query, and our query is using our 2 parameters that we created, actually 3. Let's hit OK. All right, going to save this. So we do have a way to get the data, but we don't have any kind of visualization. So it's time now, let's go ahead and bring over a chart. We're going to go with the HTML5 charts, which behind the scenes is actually high charts, which a lot of you may already be familiar with. Did it not drag over? Or is it taking? Ah, there we go. All right, there's a lot of different visualizations from high charts that you can include in your Jaspersoft reports here. For this particular one, we need a column chart. So we'll specify that. Let's move it over. And let's go ahead and make sure it takes up the full height and width. So we'll decide on fit both. Great. All right. So let's go ahead and, we can run this and nothing's going to really display meaningfully because we haven't actually fired up which data fields should be displayed, what should be a category, what should be series, etc. Okay. So let's go ahead and do that now. You right click on your chart, click Edit Chart Properties. All right, so the data configuration tab, first of all, the data set is pointing to the report main data set, the data set that we created at the report level. So that's fine. So at this point, we need to decide what the category is. And the categories will be the actual station names. So let's go ahead and bring that in. I'm going to paste all this in for you guys. Nope, I'm not. All right. Okay. So the station name will be displayed as each category of the 3 series. Okay. The next step would be to define each of our series. So our series would be available bikes, bikes disabled, and station capacity. There are 3 series we're going to show per category. So for the first series, go ahead and say that we want to hook that up to the field pneumatics. Alrighty. The tooltip will be available bikes. You notice it's a literal string, so I am using quotes, whereas this will be evaluated at runtime as a value coming from the field that's called num bytes available. Okay. And let's add another series. Series 2 will be the bikes disabled.
And there are, behind those expressions and that sort of thing, there is a little button to the side, the right-hand side, which you can actually click on and see all the values that you have available to you and various expressions and that sort of stuff too.
Yeah. Well, let's do that for the third one. So the value expression for series 3, let's open this up. You can actually build your expressions with parameters, whether they're built-in parameters or report-defined parameters, like here. Fields, here's our field names that you can reference, different variables, etc. Okay. So for this series, we're going to show the field for station capacity. So you can actually just double-click that and finish. All right. So now we have all of our series defined for the single category of station name. And our query was actually defined to return just the top 10 records. So we don't need to worry about that. Okay, let's hit OK. I'm going to save this and let's see what we've got so far. I'm going to hit preview. Now, by default, it will preview with a Java renderer. Since this is going to be embedded into a web page. Oh, let's see, what would I do here? You guys want to pause?
Sure.
Okay, so let's go ahead and preview this. And now we can see that we actually have data. That's great. But it's not styled the way that our designers wanted it to be styled, different colors, font sizes, etc. So let's go back to design. I'll show you how to change some of these things. Go back to edit chart properties. Now you saw that I clicked the preview tab below here to actually run the chart. I'm going to show you a different way. Now that we're making frequent changes to the look and feel, if you click the show hide chart panel, you can see a preview of the actual chart. And if you click on the preview area right here and select auto refresh, it will automatically refresh every time you change a single setting. So it's up to you whether you want to do that or not. Depends on how much data you're querying and if that's very efficient for your use case. But we'll go ahead and turn that on now. And let's click on the chart formatting tab now. So the first difference we see are the colors that are being rendered for the series. For the actual bike share app, we have this nice green, a salmon color, and a gray for our series. So if we click on the colors palette, this is out of the box, kind of the standard set of colors you get. I'm going to use a custom set. I do know that I got this already copied, so I'm just going to paste it over here. Basically, this report has been set to run as Java as far as rendering. So we're going to insert these hexadecimal representations of color values into this array list. And finish. As soon as I did that, it instantly updated the chart preview here. And so now we have the correct colors. Okay, the next difference that we see is we've got these grid lines here going across the plot area. The designers don't want grid lines. Instead, they want an alternating color. Okay, so let's do that part next. Now, we're going to go to the advanced properties. And I just want to call out, under the hood, this is high charts. And basically, most, if not all, of the API that's available through high charts is available here as well. In fact, you can cross-reference and get more help by looking at the high charts API reference. And you'll see that even the help notes for each of them, the properties in Jaspersoft, mirror what's actually out on high charts API documentation. So that's really nice. We'll go down to the y-axis. And we're going to say we want the grid line width to not show up. So grid line width, by default, it's 1. Let's make this 0. And now those grid lines are gone. Great. So now we're going to set the alternating grid color. And let's see, what color is it? Let's see. There we go. I must have pasted some funny character in there. All right. So now our grid lines are gone. Our alternating color is in. Getting closer. The next difference that we see is we wanted the steps of each of the tick marks on the y-axis to be step by 5. And right now in this chart, it's stepping by 2.5. So we can change that as well. We're going to stay within the y-axis. Go down to tick interval. And we're going to set this to 5. Great, so that's changed as well. Okay. Also, the labels right down here on the y-axis, the font's a little big, so we need to minimize that just a bit. So let's go on up to our x-axis and labels, style, and font. The default's 11 right now. Let's set this to 9 pixels. And that's smaller. That looks nice. All right, and finally, we don't have a title here. We need to have a title, top stations in need. We'll go back over to show simple properties, title. And it's centered by default. We want that to the left. And there we go. Let's hit OK. We'll run this. Reset it. And there we go. So basically any kind of customization that you can do with the HighCharts API, you can achieve that in Jaspersoft as well. If there's any advanced property that isn't already listed in the Jaspersoft UI, then you can actually add it yourself under the user-defined area. So it's very, it's very versatile that way. Again, if you click on any of these properties, you have inline help, which is pretty much the same as what you'd get out on the web on HighCharts website. It's documentation. Okay, so that's about it with actually creating the chart. At this point, I would publish it to our report server by clicking Publish Report. I'm not going to do that right now since we already have one up there. But it's really that simple. As far as working in teams, especially on larger projects, you'd want to make sure that all of your report definitions and any dependents files like images or scripts are source controlled. So if you use Git or some other source control platform that Eclipse supports, you could also manage that version control and check in from here. A couple of productivity tips. So if you look at all of the different reports that are on this dashboard, with the exception of the stations in need, all of them need the same parameters. Franchise, region, time frame. And there's a couple more under the hood that you don't really see. They're not represented by the UI. So if you have that situation where you're having to create the same parameters for multiple reports, one thing that you can do in Jaspersoft Studio is create what's called a parameter set. And let's just go ahead and we'll take this one, the blank A4. Let's do that really quick. So right now, the only parameters available on this report are just the built-in ones. And we're going to create this as a new report that gets inserted or embedded onto this dashboard. So it's going to need all the same parameters. So if you click on Window and Preferences, and you go down to the Jaspersoft Studio node here, and then Parameter Sets. You can create a set of parameters that you treat as a whole. I have one here already for the Bike Share Manager dashboard parameters. If I double click on that, I can see all of the different parameters that most, if not all of these reports will need. We have franchise, region, start date, end date, time frame, session ID. A lot of these are used internally. And this is where you decide what data type it is, should it be prompting for values, etc. Okay, so this has been defined one time. So now if I create a new report that I want to use these parameters for, you create parameter set, choose the one that you created, and boom, you have all of your parameters here already configured for you as far as default values, things like that. So that's one little productivity tool, or tip, I should say. Another thing that's really nice is, let me go ahead and let me open this one up. At runtime, if you have a lot of parameter values and you're doing some calculations based upon those parameter values, or things just aren't coming out quite right and you're not sure why, one thing that I like to do, make this a little bigger here, is I actually created a text field here. Just drag this over. And I want the value of that text field to actually output the values that were handed in to each of the parameters. Now, start date and end date on this particular report is actually calculated at runtime behind the scenes based upon the value that came in as time frame. So if I want to see what start date and end date ends up actually being, which is inserted into that database query, then I can echo that back out with this text field. Okay. And it's really handy whether you're running it within Studio or the web developer is embedding it and he's not quite sure why it's not showing the right date ranges, for example. He can always say that he wants those debug values to be output. And the way he does that is we have a debug parameter I created. It's just a Boolean. By default, it's false. So if you want to see your values to help you debug, then you would hand in the value true. And this particular text field does not get shown unless that debug value is true. I made that happen by on the actual text field, we only want it to print if the parameter value for debug is equal to true. Now, I found that I was doing this for all of the different reports. So what you can do is once you create something like this, and maybe it's, you know, this composite element that's, you know, it's a lot of different elements that you want to duplicate over and over again, which we've had to do as well. This one's fairly simple, but still, you can just right click on it, save as a composite element. Let's just call this our element. Okay. And we'll just put it in the composite elements pane of the palette over here. And we'll hit finish. So now I've saved this as kind of a template that I can reuse over and over again. And I can drag this onto any report I want. And then if I need to tweak the value a little bit, I can. So that's another little productivity tip there as well. Look at opportunities where you can define things once and then reuse it later, whether it be your set of parameters or the components that you're creating. So that's about it for my section.
Okay, thank you for that, Rachel. So we've looked at some ways in which Jaspersoft visualizes data in applications, and Rachel's gone through development of visualization and some productivity tips and so on. So what we're going to do now is dive into how you could just get raw data out of Jaspersoft to use inside your application. All right. So just a brief revisit. So this map visualization is actually using a raw JavaScript library, which is actually from TIBCO GeoAnalytics. And but like any sort of map that would appear, you need to get the data from somewhere, right? That's done in this case, through essentially a microservice call that gives back some JSON that the visualization actually goes and processes and creates these circles with this in this position and so on with it. And then we've got this sort of drill down thing here, a different map. It's not summarizing the state of the regions. In this case, it's giving you the individual bike share stations and the status of those things. So if you just look at these, oh, here we've got Hubble Street and so on. So again, the data is coming from a microservice, giving data out of Jaspersoft and going right into the app so that the mapping configuration can actually go and use that. So how do we do that, right? So let's go into Mr. Studio again for a second. So this is these are Jasper reports. And you can see already here, this is generating some JSON, okay? So when we go into the design view of the report, it's not a very pretty report, not by any stretch. But what it's going and doing here is we're running a query, as the sort of thing that Rachel was doing before, and we're laying out some data, and we're using some of the capabilities of a Jasper report for aggregation. In this particular case, it's the things that you're actually seeing here. We've got a title and so on, and then we've got this footer. So at the end of every group, in this case, every region, this information is going to be thrown out. So let's have a quick look at the query on this. And there it is. It's doing some aggregation here, just to loop, basically run through the various stations inside the across this region, this Bay Area region, P franchise and so on there. So it's getting row by row data back about all the stations, okay? And then we've got this thing which is saying, oh, I'm just going to spit out data at the end of every group, in this particular case, every region within the franchise. And the main thing that sort of, this is the franchise ID, this is the region, here's the name, here's the lat long of the thing as well. And then there's this last one, which is a little calculation here. And if we have a look at that, it's if we've got this variable region count, and if we round out the stations in need count divided by the region count, is it we're basically a metric there to say how many stations are in need and what is the percentage of the total stations basically there, so that we can then make that appear inside the visualization that or what the map needs to go and render things. So we're using this report to run a query and actually process the data. And you can use things like, as Rachel said before, you can have all these different elements, including things like lists or a crosstab, which is going to do a bunch of aggregation for you, right? So to actually use the report as a calculation engine. And then we're also working on, well, now we've got all this data which has all been calculated up. What can we do with that? So we can do some things like this. If you look at this guy and we look at there's this thing, we've got some tags that you can put on the individual elements that you want to display. In this particular case, the JSON metadata path. So what this is going to do is create the value that's in this field is going to appear in a JSON structure with this name, basically. Okay, repeat the value with missing, custom expressions, and so on. So you can do all manner of things to tag things up, format the values, and all that sort of thing right within it, which is you know, I found really easy to go and do, rather than having to write a bunch of JavaScript in, you know, in a Node app or you know, with Express or something like that. You can use the whole infrastructure to go and do this. So let's have a look and preview this. So one of Jaspersoft's sort of claims to fame is you can export the values in a report and the look and feel and so on in many different output types, including HTML, which is what we mostly focus on for things like charts. But you can also, there's a bunch of things to do with just straight metadata. In this particular case, this JSON metadata output is going to use those tag values, the system ID and so on, to actually go and generate things. So you could also do it with the CSVs as well, which is another format that people often use in microservices to get back to the web app. So what this, I mean, let's just if we look at it just straight in, I don't know, what would it be? Just in straight, say, HTML. It looks pretty low level and all that sort of thing, but then we come along and say, we want the JSON output, metadata output. It's going to use those tags to go and generate these values. You can see it down to quite a low level of detail there. So this is I find this, you know, we've been doing this for many years. People sort of use the power of Jaspersoft's data access, and as well as its ability to calculate and reformat things in a precise way to actually generate data output. It could be just, you know, sometimes people are putting things into Excel or CSV, but increasingly with web applications, you can use this sort of JSON output as well, which is a real shortcut and productivity enhancer in terms of and actually doing quite the array of microservices people use within their app. So you can create all the visualizations in Jaspersoft, but you can also use use Jaspersoft as this data engine for your application as well. Okay, so that's how all I wanted to cover for that for now.
All right, so thank you, Sherman, very much for that last demo. Thank you, Rachel, for that in-depth tutorial of Studio, including some of those best practices. Again, yeah, whether you're wanting to design something with a visual designer using Jaspersoft, or Sherman pointed out in that last section, if you just want to use the data from Jaspersoft and put that into your own custom or third-party visualization, that's possible as well. So you get the flexibility of how you want to design something, and then, as Rachel showed, within Jaspersoft, you can pretty much match any design spec that you receive. You have full access to that high charts API, and so you can configure things at a really granular level. Let's quickly jump back into the presentation and close things out here for part 3 of the webinar. And I'm actually just going to pass you right back over to Sherman and to Rachel to give you 3 key takeaways. What were the things that we want to leave you with from this section? And the last thing, I'll point you to a few resources around the webinar series, and then we'll send you on your way and look for you in webinar number 4. Sherman, back to you.
Okay. So developing, air quotes, a report in Jaspersoft, you know, traditionally has been used for straight, you know, pixel perfect reports, PDF and all that sort of thing. But what we've been increasingly doing over the years is this thing where using that same infrastructure, you can create interactive web visualizations as well. Query data and render the visualization and then embed it wherever you want. So don't just think of, you know, it's Jaspersoft is an information provider rather than a straight reporting tool, because we have all this flexibility in the way from data access as well as the actual visualization rendering.
Yes, as far as you know, reducing the workload and optimizing your efforts, you do want to think about how you can reuse parts of your reports, your data, your visualizations, your overall effort wherever you can. I demonstrated a couple little tips today on creating parameter sets for reuse, creating composite elements for reuse. You also, I've used, created sub-reports that have been reused in other reports before. The same is true for basically if you need to create a custom visualization component. You want to create it and design it in a way that you can plug in certain values and it can be reused and modified at runtime, which I've done with Jaspersoft as well. So,
and probably one of the big ones is, of course, styles as well.
Styles, yes,
Yeah,
I should have
right.
said something about styles.
Yeah, you can.
So,
Yeah.
right. If you've got a common font, common heading, subheading, subheading, styles, colors, things like that, you can create these predefined name styles within Studio and then apply those to your reports or individual elements on those reports so that you're not setting your font, your size, your color, your, et cetera, et cetera. You define it once, apply it many times. So, yes.
The other last bit, avoiding hand coding data access. I see a lot of times when people are developing web apps, there's a real big split in the roles and responsibilities between the people who are responsible for the data end of things and the transactions versus the people who are consuming the data and rendering things. So, one of the things that we see with Jaspersoft, it sort of puts the data access and the visualization sort of together in a different way, which is much more productive. So be also thinking about how can you automate and make more rigorous that visualization creation, which is dependent upon data access.
All right, thank you guys once again very much. I know we're a little bit over the expected time, so I want to get everyone on their way here, but just a few resources to check out to get more involved with the demo app. Obviously, we're on this webinar series now, and we're part 3 of 5, so the last 2 remaining webinars will be published shortly. And the next most notable one is going to be on embedding. So we've talked about the designs, visualizations, reports in this webinar. We're going to talk about how to actually integrate those into your application in the following webinar. So keep an eye out for that. The other thing I mentioned in the beginning of the presentation was if you're interested in just getting a high-level run-through of the workflow for the application, that's available on jaspersoft.com, and you should be able to find that pretty easily from the homepage. Again, that will walk you through how the application was built at a high level. There are a series of workshops that we're currently developing that are going to be released that really complement each of the, or at least webinars 2 through 5 in terms of how the application was built. So you get this interactive webinar type format in terms of how this is built, but you also get a written set of workshops that you'll be able to dig through and see some of this information in more detail. So keep an eye out for that as well. And then one of the last things, this is currently available, that was really important to us is we wanted to make all of the source code for the application publicly available, as well as the data set, so that we can speak to these things on the webinar. But if you're interested, you can actually go and access that, reference specific parts of the application code, and apply them for your particular project, or at least apply the approaches that we use for our project into your own projects. So that's available through Jaspersoft community, and you can also find it directly from our GitHub repo for this bike share demo app, and you can see that at the bottom there, how to access it. So again, thank you very much to Sherman for the first and the last parts. Thank you to Rachel for that great demo on Jaspersoft Studio. We hope you enjoyed the content. I will wish you a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week, and we'll see you for webinar 4. Thank you.